Hey everyone, I am Roseheart. Before we dive into today's story, it would mean the world if you could hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. It really helps the channel grow and keeps these stories coming. The stagecoach ground to a halt, its brakes shrieking a metallic lament that shattered the eerie stillness blanketing Dead Creek. A cloud of rust-colored dust billowed, momentarily obscuring the weathered town sign. Dead Creek population, dwindling. Clutching her worn carpet bag, Julia Prescott squinted through the dust-streaked window. The reality bore no resemblance to the vibrant frontier town she'd conjured from her fiancé's letters. Instead, a forlorn main street unfolded before her, flanked by buildings that seemed to sigh with forgotten failures. The sun blazed down, turning the air into a suffocating blanket, adding to the palpable sense of dread. She descended cautiously, the hem of her travelling dress grazing the gritty earth. The driver, a craggy man whose face was a roadmap of hard living, tossed her bag unceremoniously at her feet. He spat a brown stream towards a tenacious tumbleweed clinging to a building's corner, then hauled himself back onto the driver's seat, desperate to escape Dead Creek's grasp. A crack of the whip, and the stagecoach vanished, leaving Julia swallowed by the unsettling quiet. Straightening, she attempted a reassuring smile, finding it felt fragile and false. "Sheriff Barrett?" she called, her voice a mere thread against the vast canvas of silence. Only the wind answered, whistling a mournful tune through the broken panes of deserted buildings. From the inky depths of the saloon doorway, a figure stood sentinel. Eli Barrett, a man hewn from granite and haunted by loss, leaned against the frame, his gaze locked on the new arrival. The photograph she'd sent had captured a fleeting glimpse of her spirit, a spark now nearly extinguished by the harshness of Dead Creek. He remained hidden, a silent judge, battling the storm within, remorse, a flicker of hope, and the aching certainty that she deserved so much more than this desolate place, than him. The shadow of his hat veiled his eyes, concealing the inner turmoil. He knew he should greet her, offer some thread of welcome. But the words remained trapped, strangled by the ghosts of yesterday. Unease tightening its grip, Julia took a tentative step toward the nearest structure, a dilapidated building sporting a faded sign reading Bellwether's General Store. Paint peeled in brittle flakes, the porch sagged beneath its own weight, and the windows were filmed with grime. Yet it was the sole beacon of potential life in the grim vista. She ascended the groaning steps, the sound magnified in the heavy quiet, and pushed open the door, a tiny bell chiming a fragile melody. The store's interior was cloaked in shadows, carrying the scents of dried herbs, dusty flour sacks, and a pervasive staleness. Behind the counter, a woman whose face was a testament to the brutal realities of frontier existence stood arms crossed, scrutinizing Julia with a blend of suspicion and world-weary resignation. This was Martha Bellwether, the town's keeper of tales, an unofficial archivist of tragedy. "Looking for something, miss?" Martha's voice was gravelly, devoid of any welcoming warmth. I'm Julia Prescott," Julia managed, striving for composure under the woman's penetrating stare. "I'm here to marry Sheriff Barrett." Martha's expression remained unchanged, a mask of hard-won indifference. "So, you're the mail-order bride." The statement was delivered as a simple truth, lacking explicit judgment, yet tinged with something akin to pity. "He didn't say you were arriving today." I assumed he would meet me," Julia stammered, her carefully constructed hopes beginning to crumble like dry earth. "Eli's a busy man," Martha conceded, her tone softening almost imperceptibly, though her eyes remained guarded. "Especially lately. This town, it ain't likely what you pictured." "I can see that," Julia admitted, her voice barely audible. Martha sighed, a sound like air hissing from an old, deflated bellows. "Look, Miss Julia, this isn't a place that welcomes easily. Folks here, they harbour long memories. And some things are better left in the past." "Buried?" Julia asked, her brow furrowing with confusion. "What do you mean?" Martha hesitated, her gaze darting to the window, as if fearing eavesdroppers. "Just be careful. Eli, he's a good man at his core. But he carries a burden you can barely imagine. In this town, it's filled with shadows and secrets. Secrets that'll swallow you whole if you're not careful." "What secrets?" Julia pressed, her curiosity ignited despite the growing apprehension coiling within her. Martha shook her head. "That's for you to unearth, should you remain determined. But don't claim I didn't offer a warning." She reached beneath the counter, producing a tarnished key. "Here. This fits the old parsonage. It's been empty for years, but it's the only place I can think to put you. Eli should find you eventually." Julia took the key, her fingers brushing against Martha's weathered hand. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice laced with both gratitude and dawning dread. "Don't thank me yet," Martha countered, her gaze unyielding. "Just heed my words. Exercise caution." Julia retreated into the glaring sunlight, the key a cold weight in her palm. She glanced back at the saloon, but the shadowed doorway stood empty. Eli had vanished. She was utterly alone in Dead Creek, a community that held her in disdain, burdened with secrets threatening to consume her. The weight of her carpetbag felt crushing, mirroring the despair settling in her heart. This was not the fresh start she had envisioned. This was something far more ominous. The stagecoach dust hadn't cleared before the whispers began, crawling over Julia's skin like ants. They were a palpable thing, amplifying the town's desolate feel as she navigated Main Street. Shopkeepers ceased their chores, eyes tracking her with blatant curiosity, conversations dying mid-sentence as she neared. Some offered curt nods. Most just stared, faces a canvas of speculation mingled with disapproval. The general store offered no refuge. There, Agnes Plummer, her face a topography of wrinkles and scorn, guarded the counter, arms crossed. "Can I help you, miss?" she clipped, hostility barely leashed in her tone. Julia requested Staples flour, sugar, coffee, but Agnes moved with deliberate slowness, each scoop of metal against metal echoing in the sudden quiet. Two women, perched on crates by the Cracker Barrel, cut off their hushed exchange, watching Julia with undisguised animosity. One, her hair scraped back in a tight bun, murmured to her companion, a wave of suppressed laughter trailing Julia as she gathered her goods. The walk back to the sheriff's house felt interminable. The groceries' weight was insignificant compared to the burden of the town's judgment. She imagined eyes scrutinizing her from behind lace curtains, lurking in darkened doorways. Each footfall on the boardwalk sounded like a muttered accusation. Eli's letters had painted Dead Creek in rosy hues that vision now lay shattered, replaced by a stark, unforgiving reality. Eli remained elusive. The house, though tidy, felt sterile, devoid of personality. Even the scent of Martha's bread had dissipated, leaving a faint, musty odor. Unpacking her meager wardrobe, each dress felt like a fragile relic of her former existence, a life receding into memory. That evening, Eli finally materialized, filling the doorway with his imposing frame, his face obscured by shadow. "Evening, Julia," he greeted, his voice gravelly, almost reluctant. "Eli," she responded, striving for warmth, but her voice sounded unnatural, forced. "How did your day go?" He shrugged, eyes flitting away. "Busy. Usual saloon trouble." A pause. Martha said she got you settled. Yes. She was very accommodating. Careful words, masking her disquiet. She looks after things. Eli's tone was neutral, devoid of inflection. He shifted his weight, as if impatient to leave. Supper's on the stove. Help yourself. With that, he vanished back into the night, leaving Julia enveloped in the oppressive silence of the house. Her solitary meal tasted like dust and ashes. The next morning, she ventured out again, determined to breach the town's frosty exterior. She chose the church, seeking solace and, perhaps, a friendly face. But approaching, she overheard voices spilling from within. "May Lord a bride," Agnes Plummer's voice, sharp and clear, sliced through the air. Imagine the gall, waltzing in here, thinking she can replace Sarah. "Poor Eli," another voice offered, dripping with sympathy. "After everything he's been through, this can't be easy." "Easy for him?" Agnes scoffed. "What about Sarah? She was a saint. This woman is nothing but a stranger, come to exploit his grief." Julia's stomach plummeted. Frozen in place, her face burned with shame and indignation. She longed to confront them, to defend herself, but the words choked in her throat. Instead, she spun around and fled, tears blurring the landscape. Back at the house, Eli was cleaning his rifle on the porch. He glanced up at her approach, his expression hardening at her distress. "What's wrong?" he demanded, his voice clipped. I overheard them," Julia stammered, unable to meet his gaze. "At the church Agnes Plummer, they were saying what?" Eli's tone was a warning. "That I'm trying to replace Sarah," Julia whispered, the words barely audible. "That I'm exploiting his grief." Eli's face turned thunderous. He slammed the rifle onto the porch with a force that startled her. "Damn them," he growled, his eyes blazing. "They have no right to." His anger seemed to deflate, replaced by weariness and remorse. He raked a hand through his hair, his shoulders slumping. "Look, Julia," he said, his voice softening almost imperceptibly. "This town, it's been through a lot. They're protective. It'll take time for them to accept you." "Accept me?" Julia cried, her voice strained with desperation. "Eli, they despise me. They whisper behind their hands. They look at me like I'm some interloper." Eli sighed, his gaze drifting to the horizon. "I know it's not easy," he murmured. "But you have to understand Sarah was. She was everything to this town. To me." The words hung, laden with meaning. Julia stared at him, her heart fracturing. She realized her battle wasn't merely against the town's prejudice, but against a ghost. Sarah's ghost. A spectre that loomed between her and Eli, a constant reminder of her inadequacy. "So what am I supposed to do, Eli?" she pleaded, her voice trembling. "Just endure it. Live here, knowing that everyone hates me, knowing that you'll never truly see me." Eli remained mute, his face a study in pain and regret, the silence between them expanding like a bottomless ravine. The relentless sun beat down, casting long, stark shadows that mirrored the darkness engulfing their hearts. A mournful wind clawed at Julia's shore as she crested the hill. Below, Dead Creek sprawled, a tableau of decaying timber and hushed existences, each dwelling seemingly an observing eye. She'd kept her destination from Eli, who had become a courteous stranger since their vows, sharing her bed, but little else. Clarity beckoned. The cemetery was a small, unkempt haven. Gravestones tilted drunkenly, besieged by rampant weeds. Julia's gaze danced across the markers, a stony chorus of grief. Then, she found it. A recent stone, simpler than its neighbours, adorned with withered blossoms. Sarah May, beloved daughter, cherished friend. Taken too young. Julia knelt, her fingers tracing the carved words. A wave of dizziness assaulted her. This wasn't merely a name, a spectre. This was a vibrant woman, missed and mourned, whose absence stained every corner of the town. Whose phantom now stood squarely between Julia and her husband. The wind intensified, lashing her face. She pictured Sarah, radiant and full of life, sun-drenched laughter echoing. What fate had befallen her? Town whispers offered no comfort, just veiled accusations and knowing looks. An accident, they'd murmur. A tragic stumble. Yet, Julia glimpsed doubt in their eyes, unspoken questions lingering like a persistent chill. A crow's rasping call sliced through the air, mirroring the hollowness within Julia. She rose, brushing away clinging earth. The panoramic vista offered no insight, only deeper mysteries. Why did Eli carry such a burden of sorrow? Why did the townsfolk regard her with such cool reserve? What secrets lay interred beneath this wind-swept slope? With a new-found resolve hardening her steps, she descended back towards town. She refused to exist as a mere shadow defined by Sarah's memory. She needed the truth, regardless of the pain it might inflict. Julia would untangle the enigma of Sarah May, even if it meant dismantling the very foundations of Dead Creek. Back at the sheriff's office, weariness carved deep lines into Eli's face as he sat at his desk. He glanced up as she entered, his eyes guarded and shuttered. "Where were you?" His voice was devoid of inflection. "I visited her grave," Julia stated, her voice unwavering. Eli recoiled, as if physically struck. He turned away, fixating on the view outside. "Why would you do that?" "I needed understanding," Julia replied, drawing closer. "Of you. Of this place." Silence hung heavy, his shoulders rigid. "Tell me about her, Eli," Julia implored. "Tell me about Sarah." He shook his head, his voice thick with emotion. "Don't. Some things are better left undisturbed." "They aren't undisturbed, Eli," Julia countered. "They're everywhere, in every unspoken word, every glance you direct my way. It's poison in everything." He finally met her gaze, his own eyes brimming with a sorrow that mirrored hers. "You don't understand," he rasped. "Then help me to," Julia pleaded. "Tell me what happened." He hesitated, his jaw tight. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. At last he spoke, his voice raw with anguish. "It was an accident," he stated, the words clipped and precise. "She fell. No one could have prevented it. But that's not the narrative peddled around town," Julia challenged, her gaze unwavering. "They whisper. They insinuate. They look at you as if you bear the blame." Eli squeezed his eyes shut, his face contorted. "They don't know," he said, his voice strained and ragged. "They know nothing." "Then enlighten me," Julia pressed. "Tell me what they don't know." He opened his eyes, his gaze locking with hers. "The story's not a badge of honor," he admitted, his voice low and gravelly. "But if you are chasing the truth, you are entitled to hear it." He paused, drawing a ragged breath. "Sarah and I, we weren't thriving. Not by the end." Julia waited, her pulse hammering in her chest. "She wanted to leave," Eli continued, his voice barely audible. "She yearned to return east. I couldn't bear to part. I implored her to stay." "And then?" Julia asked, her voice trembling. "We argued," Eli said, thick with self-reproach. "We quarreled on the bluff. That day was blustery, much like this one. She was enraged. She turned and lost her footing. Julia stared at him, her mind struggling to assimilate his words. "You witnessed her fall?" Eli nodded, his eyes pools of torment. "I reached out, striving to seize her, but I was too late. She tumbled over the precipice." "And you presented it to the town as an accident?" Julia asked, incredulous. "What else could I have done?" Eli pleaded. "They adored her. They wouldn't have comprehended. They would have laid the blame firmly at my door. But they suspect you regardless," Julia pointed out. "They simply lack all the details." Eli hung his head, his shoulders slumping. "I know," he whispered. "I sense their disapproval daily." Julia stepped forward, her hand outstretched to touch his arm. He flinched, but didn't recoil. "You can't continue in this vein, Eli," she said, her voice gentle but resolute. "You must reveal the truth. For your peace, for Sarah's memory, and for mine." He glanced up at her, a flicker of hope igniting in his gaze. Do you believe they'll find absolution for me?" "I cannot predict that," Julia conceded. "But I am sure you'll find no solace until you try." The silence returned, though this time with a different quality. Less constricting. Mirror, encouraging. Julia knew their journey would be arduous. Yet, for the first time since her arrival in Dead Creek, a sliver of optimism pierced through. Perhaps together they could heal the wounds. Perhaps together they could discover a path forward. Perhaps, beneath the burden of secrets and the shadow of yesterday, a fresh beginning was attainable. She squeezed his arm, her gaze holding steady. "We'll confront it together," she vowed, her voice unwavering. "We'll confront it together, Eli." The weathered map, sketched on the back of a feed store receipt by Mrs. Gable, led Julia past the last straggling houses of Dead Creek, the dirt road dissolving into a rutted track barely wider than her buggy. The air grew thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, a stark contrast to the dust and suspicion that seemed to cling to everything within the town limits. She sought out Old Man Hemlock, a recluse who lived on the fringes of society, hoping he could shed some light on Sarah May's life, a life that seemed to haunt Dead Creek as much as it haunted Eli. The cabin, when she finally found it nestled in a grove of skeletal trees, looked as though it had grown organically from the earth, a haphazard collection of logs and scavenged materials. Smoke curled lazily from a chimney, fashioned from a rusty stovepipe. A cacophony of sounds greeted her arrival. The squawking of chickens, the bleating of a goat, and the rhythmic thump of something heavy striking wood. She hesitated, the map clutched in her gloved hand. The place exuded an aura of isolation, a deliberate severance from the world she knew. Yet, she pressed on, driven by a need to understand, a need to unravel the secrets that were slowly suffocating her new life. "Hello," she called out, her voice swallowed by the vastness of the surrounding woods. The thumping stopped abruptly. A moment later, the door creaked open, revealing a figure as weathered and gnarled as the trees surrounding his home. Jedediah Hemlock was a man carved from the land itself. His face was a roadmap of wrinkles, etched by years of sun, wind, and solitude. His eyes, though clouded with age, held a spark of unnerving intelligence. He wore a patched and faded flannel shirt, overalls held together by a single strap, and boots that looked as though they'd seen more miles than the stagecoach. "Looking for something, Mom?" he rasped, his voice like dry leaves skittering across the ground. "Mr. Hemlock, I'm Julia Prescott. I was told you might remember Sarah May." A flicker of something crossed his face, a shadow of memory, or perhaps regret. He didn't invite her in, but he didn't turn her away either. Sarah May a pretty thing. Gone too soon. I understand you knew her well. Julia stepped closer, the scent of wood smoke and something vaguely medicinal clinging to the air around him. He chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. Knew her? Everyone in Dead Creek knew Sarah May. But knowing and understanding, that's two different things, ain't it? He spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dirt. What do you mean? Julia asked, her heart quickening. He gestured towards a crude wooden stool with a gnarled hand. Have a seat if you like. Story's a long one, and my legs ain't what they used to be. Julia perched on the stool, feeling a sense of unease settling over her. She felt like she was entering a world disconnected from time. Hemlock lowered himself onto an upturned crate, his gaze fixed on some distant point in the woods. Sarah May. She was like a wildflower, blooming in a patch of weeds. Full of life, full of dreams. Too good for this place, some said. He paused, his eyes narrowing. She had secrets, though. Everyone does, I reckon. But hers, they were heavier than most. Secrets? What kind of secrets? Julia leaned forward, her voice barely a whisper. He looked at her, his eyes piercing through her apprehension. Secrets that could rot a town from the inside out. Secrets that some folks would kill to keep buried. Julia swallowed hard. Do you know what those secrets were? Hemlock sighed, a long, drawn-out sound. I got my suspicions, heard whispers, saw things out of a corner of my eye, but proving it, that's a different matter, and some things are better left undisturbed. But Sarah May is dead, Julia protested. Wouldn't bringing the truth to light honor her memory? Truth ain't always a comforting thing, child. Sometimes it's a storm that tears everything apart. And Dead Creek it's barely holding on as it is. He rubbed his chin, his gaze shifting back to the woods. She was courted by more than one, fine young woman, but Dead Creek has a way of swallowing up the pretty things, taking the light from their eyes. Sheriff Eli, he was smitten, but some thought another had her heart, a shadow in the night. Julia's mind raced. Eli had said it was an accident, a fool during an argument. But Hemlock's words painted a different picture, a picture of hidden passions and dangerous secrets. Who else might have been involved with her? She pressed. Hemlock hesitated, his silence heavy with unspoken words. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely audible. That's a question best left unasked, child. Some stones are best left unturned. This town it remembers, and it doesn't take kindly to those who stir up the past. He looked directly at Julia, his eyes filled with a strange mix of warning and pity. You're new here. You don't know the weight of this place. Be careful, Mrs. Prescott. Some secrets are better left buried with the dead. He stood up, signalling the end of their conversation. Julia rose, feeling a chill despite the warmth of the afternoon sun. She thanked him, her voice trembling slightly. As she turned to leave, Hemlock called out, his voice raspy but clear. One more thing, Mrs. Prescott. Sarah May, she wasn't the only one with secrets. Everyone in Dead Creek is hiding something, even the sheriff. Julia didn't reply. She climbed back into her buggy, her mind reeling. Hemlock's words had planted seeds of doubt and intrigue, seeds that threatened to blossom into a dangerous obsession. The road back to Dead Creek seemed longer, the shadows deeper. The secrets of Sarah May, and the secrets of Dead Creek itself, were calling to her, and she knew, with a growing sense of dread, that she wouldn't be able to resist their pull. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the dusty street in hues of blood orange, as Julia retraced her steps from Hemlock's dilapidated cabin. The old recluse's pronouncements resonated within her, a disquieting melody. Each breath of wind seemed to hiss accusations, secrets clinging to the air like the ghost of a forgotten bonfire. Urgency spurred her onward, a longing for the sanctuary, however modest, Eli had provided. Then, a figure materialized from the deepening gloom, intercepting her. Eli. Worry had carved itself onto his features, accentuating the lines around his eyes. The composed sheriff was gone, replaced by a man wrestling a private torment. The usual warmth in his gaze had been supplanted by an unnerving iciness that constricted Julia's throat. "Julia," he rumbled, his voice a coarse rasp that shattered the evening stillness. "We need to talk." She halted, her fingers instinctively brushing the worn leather of the Bible she carried, a meager shield against the rising tide of unease. "What is it, Eli?" He closed the gap between them. The familiar scent of leather and pipe tobacco now mingled with something acrid, the sharp tang of apprehension. "I know you visited Hemlock." Not a query, but a statement. Julia lifted her chin, meeting his intense scrutiny. He knew Sarah May. A flicker of reaction, almost imperceptible, betrayed his composure. Just enough for Julia to notice. "He's a senile old man, dwelling in shadows. His mind wanders. He spoke of long-buried things, Eli, things concerning Sarah May, concerning this town." The atmosphere thickened. Eli's hands balled into fists at his sides, knuckles white in the fading light. "Those are just old wives' tales, better forgotten." "Why?" Julia's voice was a mere exhalation. "What are you so afraid of me uncovering?" His eyes sparked, a fleeting ignition of anger in their depths. "I'm not afraid, Julia. I'm trying to safeguard you." "Safeguard me? From what?" "The truth itself." He reached out, his hand hovering near her arm before recoiling as though burned. "This town, it's a tangled web. People get hurt when they start pulling at the threads." "Are you threatening me, Sheriff?" Despite her fear, her tone remained firm. She refused to be cowed. "No," he replied, his voice laced with a raw kind of anguish. "God help me, no. I'm pleading with you. Let it lie, Julia. Let Sarah May rest." "Rest? Or simply vanish from memory? Is that what you desire, Eli? For her life to be reduced to fleeting murmurs and convenient fictions?" He spun away, his shoulders slumping under some unseen burden. The steadfast strength that usually emanated from him seemed to ebb, leaving him looking diminished, more fragile than she'd ever witnessed. "You don't comprehend." "Then help me understand," Julia implored, drawing closer. "Tell me what transpired. Give me the truth." He shook his head, jaw rigid. "I can't. It's too dangerous." "Dangerous for whom, Eli? For me, or for you?" Silence hung, heavy and suffocating, punctuated only by the mournful groan of a distant windmill. Unspoken accusations swirled between them, a stifling fog of distrust and dread. Julia retreated a step, her heart aching with disappointment. She'd hoped, naively perhaps, that Eli would confide in her, that he would trust her. But she was still an outsider, a newcomer in a community fiercely protective of its secrets. "I came here intending to be your wife, Eli," she articulated, her voice betraying a tremor. "But I can't build a life on fabrication. I need to know what actually happened, regardless of how agonizing it might be." He finally faced her, his eyes conveying a desperate entreaty. "Please, Julia, for your own well-being, abandon this. Just be my wife. Let's simply be happy." Happy. The word echoed, hollow and devoid of meaning. How could genuine joy flourish when Sarah May's spectre haunted every corner of their existence? How could she place her trust in him when he was so clearly concealing something profound? "I can't, Eli," she declared, her voice resolute despite the tears threatening to spill. I can't feign contentment when he's absent." He gazed at her, his face a study in despair. "Then I'm at a loss." He pivoted and strode away, dissolving into the encroaching darkness. Julia watched his departure, her heart burdened with a complex mixture of sorrow and determination. She had yearned for a partner, a kindred spirit, but she was alone in this struggle. Eli's caution had only intensified her resolve. He wished her to desist, to forget, but she couldn't. Sarah May deserved justice, and Julia would not rest until she exhumed the truth, irrespective of the consequences. The secrets of Dead Creek would not remain interred. She resumed her trek home, the shadows appearing to elongate and contort around her, imbued with menace. The town, once perceived as quaint and welcoming, now felt filled with unseen observers and unheard warnings. Every creak of lumber, every rustle of foliage sent a tremor down her spine. Upon reaching the small dwelling, she struggled with the key, her hands trembling. The interior offered scant solace. The rooms were sparsely appointed, filled with Eli's possessions but devoid of any personal touches or warmth. A place to sleep, not a home. She ignited a lamp, the wavering light projecting dancing phantoms onto the walls. She felt exposed, undefended. Eli's caution reverberated in her mind. People get hurt when they start pulling at the threads. She knew she was vulnerable, but retreat was no longer an option. She had come too far to turn back. She needed the truth, even if it meant confronting the collective wrath of Dead Creek, even if it meant losing Eli in the process. She seated herself at the narrow table, retrieving paper and pen. She needed to impose order on her turbulent thoughts, to assemble the scattered fragments of information she possessed. Hemlock's cryptic pronouncements, Eli's agitated reaction, the hushed rumors of the townsfolk. These were pieces of a larger puzzle, and she was determined to assemble them. As she began to set words to paper, a sudden sound jolted her, a scraping noise, emanating from the rear of the house. She froze, her heart hammering against her ribs. She seized the heavy iron skillet from the stove, her grip unsteady. Slowly, cautiously, she advanced towards the back entrance. The skillet raised, prepared to defend herself. The scraping persisted, growing more insistent. She inhaled deeply and flung open the door. A gaunt stray dog stood on the porch, its ribs visible beneath its matted fur, its eyes filled with supplication. It whimpered softly, its tail wagging tentatively. Julia lowered the skillet, a wave of relief washing over her. It was merely a dog, but the apprehension lingered, a chilling premonition in her gut. She knew, with unsettling certainty, that she was not alone in her quest for the truth, and that someone, somewhere, desperately wanted her to abandon it. Dust motes pirouetted in the weak afternoon sun leaking through the sheriff's office window, streaked with grime. Eli was outer detail Julia had extracted from Mrs. Gable at the Mercantile, under the guise of a flour price inquiry. Now, alone in the close, Spartan room, a twinge of guilt tangled with her fierce resolve. Eli wouldn't have wanted this, she knew, but his cryptic warning the previous evening had only stiffened her backbone. The office mirrored Eli, practical, unadorned, utterly devoid of any personal flourish. A hefty, scarred desk dominated the space. Faded wanted posters clung to a wall, their spectral images adding to the room's oppressive mood. Julia dismissed the desk quickly. Eli was too careful to leave anything crucial exposed. Her gaze lifted, snagging on a small, almost invisible door, tucked high against the wall, nearly lost amongst the aged wood panels. An attic. Naturally. Where else would secrets burrow in a town like Dead Creek? A shaky chair was tucked away in a corner. Horning beneath the unseen portal, Julia tested its balance. It teetered, threatening to splinter under her weight. Drawing a long breath, she ascended, her pulse hammering a frantic tattoo against her ribs. A clammy chill permeated the air as she reached for the attic door, her fingers searching for a latch she couldn't discern. Finally, her hand bumped against a small, corroded hook. With a grunt, she released it, and the portal swung inward with a groan, unleashing a stale, musty odor that stung her nostrils. Darkness reigned within. Julia descended carefully, retrieved the oil lamp from Eli's desk, and coaxed it to life. The flame flickered, casting elongated, dancing shadows. Mounting the chair again, she held the lamp aloft, peering into the hidden space. It was a cramped repository of forgotten relics. Cast-off furniture, broken implements, and dusty crates were piled haphazardly, a chaotic panorama of discarded memories. Dust coated everything in a gritty shroud. Fortifying herself, Julia hoisted herself into the attic, landing with a muffled thump on the dusty boards. The chair wobbled, nearly pitching her forward. She steadied herself, lamp raised, its light carving a small path through the heavy gloom. Stifling heat pressed down from the low roof. Sweat slicked her brow as she navigated the cluttered space, senses sharp. Each creak of the boards, each rustle in the shadows, sent a jolt of adrenaline through her system. She started with the crates nearest the opening, carefully lifting the lids and peering into the gloom. Most held only commonplace items, brittle newspapers, faded photographs, and moth-ravaged garments. Nothing connected to Sarah May or her demise. Discouragement gnawed at her, but Julia shoved it back. She'd come too far to retreat now. She ventured deeper, the lamp's glow stretching into the furthest recesses. Behind a jumble of broken chairs, she spied a small wooden chest. It was unadorned, its surface marred with scratches, yet something about it snagged her attention. It felt distinct, as if harbouring a significance beyond its humble appearance. Kneeling, Julia traced the wood grain with her fingertips, feeling its smoothness beneath the grime. There was no lock, only a simple clasp. Inhaling deeply, she unfastened it and slowly raised the lid. Within, resting on faded velvet, lay a diary. Small, leather-bound, its pages yellowed with time. The leather was cracked and worn, but the gold lettering on the cover, Sarah, remained faintly legible. Julia's heart soared. This had to be it. Sarah May's diary. Carefully, she lifted it, her fingers trembling. She opened it to the first page, her eyes devouring the delicate script. The writing was precise, the words flowing with a lyrical grace. The first entry was dated 5 years prior, a few months before Sarah May's death. It chronicled her love for Eli, her aspirations for their future, and her eagerness to build a life with him in Dead Creek. As Julia turned the pages, a somber shift occurred. Sarah May's entries became more introspective, shadowed with trouble. She penned her isolation in Dead Creek, her struggles to integrate into the tightly knit community. She wrote of whispers and rumours, of feeling perpetually judged by the townspeople. Then came the entries that iced Julia's blood. Sarah May began documenting secrets, hidden truths festering beneath Dead Creek's placid surface. She felt watched, sensed a lurking darkness at the periphery. One entry, a week before her death, was particularly tilling. "I know too much," Sarah May had inscribed. "I can feel them closing in. If anything happens to me, Eli must know the truth." The entry ceased abruptly, the final sentence unfinished. Julia shut the diary, her mind spinning. Sarah May hadn't died in some unfortunate accident. She had been murdered, and she had known she was in danger. But who was the killer? And what secrets had she unearthed that warranted such a fate? A sudden creak from below cleaved the silence, sending a bolt of fear through Julia. Eli. He'd returned. Panic swelled. She had to conceal the diary, erase any trace of her presence. But time was gone. Eli was already ascending. Desperate, Julia shoved the diary back into the chest, slammed the lid shut, and scrambled to her feet. She snuffed the lamp, plunging the attic into absolute darkness, and crouched behind a mountain of boxes, her heart a frantic drum. The footsteps grew louder, closer. Eli was climbing the stairs. She held her breath, praying for invisibility. The weight of the diary and its harboured secrets pressed down on her. She now understood she was playing a deadly game, the stakes higher than she could have conceived. The truth about Sarah May's end was deeply buried within Dead Creek, and someone would kill to keep it entombed. The attic door thudded, its echo lingering in Julia's ears as Eli vanished down the staircase. She leaned against the rough planking, her pulse a frantic tattoo against her ribs. A palpable menace saturated the air. She was no longer merely an outsider, she'd become an obstacle. Inhaling deeply, Julia refocused on the trunk. Sarah May's diary lay invitingly open, its pages filled with secrets scrawled in faded ink. Picking it up, the worn leather felt strangely alive beneath her fingertips. The last entry Sarah had penned was eerily close to her demise. He's always there. I can feel him watching, even when shadows dance around me. They dismiss my fears, claim grief has poisoned my mind. But I know what I've witnessed. I know what I've overheard. This town, it smothers its ugly truths, but they always claw their way back to the surface. I'm afraid I'd learned too much. I fear what awaits me. A chill snaked down Julia's spine, despite the room's stuffy heat. This wasn't mere mourning, this was abject terror. She returned to the beginning, determined to decipher the enigma within the aged pages. Initially, the entries painted a picture of a young woman's life in Dead Creek, descriptions of the stark landscape, village tittle-tattle, and her burgeoning affection for Eli. But the unfolding narrative soon shifted, revealing a tale tinged with yearning and illicit desire. One name surfaced repeatedly, B. At first, just the initial, but soon, in increasingly agitated entries, Black Bart emerged. Rode out to Widow Johnson's claim today, claimed he was checking water levels. But I saw him, Julia. Black Bart, leaning against the barn, gazing at me as if I was the only light. He tipped his hat, and my heart nearly gave out. Eli would skin me alive if he knew. Julia's breath caught. Black Bart? The infamous desperado? Sarah May entwined with him? Impossible. Eli spoke of her with such reverence, such unwavering devotion. Had it all been a fabrication? The entries grew more daring, chronicling secret trysts, fleeting kisses under the moon's veiled light, and Sarah's escalating captivation. He claims he sees the real me, the woman Eli overlooks. He says I'm too vibrant for this dreary place, too full of life to be shackled to a man tethered to yesterday. He's wrong, I know it, but God forgive me. Desperately want to believe him. Then came the entry that froze Julia's blood. Bart revealed something today, something that could shatter everything. He said it was a map, sketched by one of his cronies before his capture. A guide to the gold. Loot pilfered from a stagecoach, buried somewhere in these hills. He suggested we run off together, build a new life. A world away from Dead Creek. But I hesitate. I don't know if I can place my trust in him, or even myself. Julia frantically riffled through the remaining leaves, searching for the map. It wasn't sewn inside the book itself. Then she spied a small folded parchment tucked in the back of the chest, beneath a time-worn silk scarf. Her fingers trembling, she unfolded it. Rough lines depicted a recognizable vista. The saw-toothed silhouette of the mountains, the serpentine path of the creek, and an unmistakable rock formation, Devil's Tooth. A bold X marked a spot nestled near its base. Stolen gold? Sarah May and Black Bart? It was a deluge. The woman Eli eulogized, the virtuous icon the town revered, was nothing like she seemed. And this mappe, it could unlock everything. A floorboard groaned downstairs. Julia swiftly folded the map and slid it into her pocket, placing the diary back inside the trunk. She shut the lid with a snap, her heart hammering. Eli was back. She clambered to her feet, attempting to regain her composure. He must not discover what she'd unearthed. Not yet. He stood at the base of the steps, his expression obscured by the shadows. "Julia?" "Eli," she managed, forcing a smile. "Just exploring." He scrutinized her for a long moment, his gaze piercing. "Find anything of note?" "Just a relics," she replied, trying to steady her voice. "Memories." He nodded slowly, his eyes still narrowed. "Memories can be treacherous things, Julia. They can ensnare you, distort you, conjure illusions. Or," she countered, "they can unveil the truth." His face hardened. "What truth are you pursuing, Julia?" She met his gaze, unwavering. "The truth about Sarah May." A muscle pulsed in his jaw. "Leave it buried, Julia. Let her rest." "I can't," she said softly. "I can't rest until I know what truly befell her." He advanced, his voice a low growl. "You're courting danger, Julia. You have no idea what you're meddling in." "Perhaps not," she said, standing her ground. "But I'm not afraid." He locked eyes with her, his own filled with a volatile mix of anger and something else unease. Then he pivoted and left, abandoning Julia in the attic, besieged by the spectres of the past and the promise of a perilous future. One thing was certain. She was no longer simply a mail-order bride in a foreign land. She was a pawn in a lethal game, and the stakes were astronomically high. The diary, the map, Sarah's secret existence, all of it pointed to a plot that extended far beyond the confines of Eli's house. She had to tread carefully. One misstep could cost her everything, even her life. That night, under the cloak of darkness, Julia crept from bed as Eli was sleeping. The moon painted long, spectral shadows across the room. She retrieved the map, her fingers tracing its cryptic lines. Devil's Tooth. She had to see for herself. She needed to know what was concealed there. She dressed quickly, pulling on her boots and a warm shawl. The air outside was biting, laced with the aroma of pine and damp earth. She slipped out of the house, her own heartbeat the only sound punctuating the silent night. As she walked toward the looming silhouette of Devil's Tooth, the unsettling sensation of being watched intensified. The secrets of Dead Creek were deeply entrenched, and unearthing them would not come without a struggle. The diary pressed into Julia's palm as she faced Eli in his office that morning. The mingled odours of cured hide and dialed brew, usually a comforting backdrop, now felt suffocating, thick with unvoiced anxieties. Eli, behind his battle-scarred desk, pretended to study papers, though Julia felt his awareness like a physical thing. Sunlight knifed through the grimy window, etching the worry lines that bracketed his Isa map of his burdens. Eli, she began, her voice a thread. "There's something you need to see." He lifted his head, expression a locked box. "What is it, Julia? This town doesn't run itself, you know." The dismissal felt forced, betrayed by a flicker of unease. She advanced, laying the aged volume before him. Sarah's diary. Eli recoiled, shoving the book away as if stung. "Where did you find that?" "In the attic," Julia stated, her voice firm despite the tremor that threatened her hands. "I think it might offer some explanations." A scoff. "Explanations for what? That Sarah was a decent soul, gone too soon? I hardly need reminding, Julia." "It's more complex than that, Eli, far more." Julia opened the diary to a dog-eared page. The ink faded, almost to ghostliness. Yet the words held. She indicated a passage describing Sarah's clandestine meetings. She was involved in an affair. Eli's fist detonated on the desk, the sound booming in the confined space. "That's a fabrication!" "Sarah would never—" "Just read it, Eli," Julia urged, her tone unwavering. "Then tell me I'm mistaken." He hesitated, jaw clenched. Slowly, with evident reluctance, he lifted the diary. His gaze tracing the lines, Julia watched the blood leach from his face as he absorbed the text. Only the whisper of turning pages disturbed the stillness. At last, he looked up, his gaze a shattered mosaic of disbelief, agony. This is impossible." "It's real, Eli," Julia answered softly. "And there's more." She indicated another entry, the one containing the crude map. She wrote about stolen gold, secreted near Devil's Tooth. Eli raked a hand through his hair, his characteristic composure dissolving. "Gold? Sarah? This is madness." "I know it's a lot to take in," Julia conceded. "But I went there last night, to Devil's Tooth. I found the landmarks she described, the peculiar rock spire, the gnarled tree, they're all there." Eli's eyes narrowed, pinning her. "You went out there? Alone? Do you understand the risks you took?" "I needed to verify it," Julia explained, her voice laced with urgency. "I needed to know if it was tangible." "And what did you uncover?" he queried, skepticism coloring his voice. "I didn't find the gold, not yet," Julia admitted. "But I found something else, a sense that I'm not alone in this hunt, that Sarah's demise was no accident." Eli rose, beginning to pace the cramped confines of the office. "You're letting shadows play tricks on your mind, Julia. This town, it warps people, makes them conjure things that aren't real." "I'm not conjuring anything, Eli," Julia insisted. "Someone murdered Sarah, and they're still at large. And I believe this gold is connected. Why would anyone kill Sarah for gold?" Eli demanded, a tremor of desperation in his tone. "It defies all reason." "Perhaps she stumbled onto it," Julia ventured. "Perhaps she intended to expose it." Eli shook his head vehemently. "No, Sarah wouldn't become entangled in anything like that." "But she was entangled, Eli," Julia responded, her voice gaining intensity. "She was consorting with an outlaw. She knew about misappropriated gold. Can't you see? The pieces are falling into place." Eli halted his pacing, turning to face Julia, his eyes a turbulent mixture of outrage and wounded affection. "I won't listen to this any longer. You're dismantling everything I cherished about her." "I'm trying to unearth the truth, Eli," Julia said, her voice gentling. "For both of us." He turned away, gazing out the window. "The truth is, Sarah is gone, and nothing you do can resurrect her." "But unraveling what happened might grant you some solace," Julia countered, moving closer. "And perhaps, just perhaps, it might exorcise some of the town's lingering ghosts." Eli remained unresponsive, his back to Julia, his shoulders slumped in defeat. She sensed the inner turmoil, the contest between safeguarding Sarah's legacy and the yearning for resolution. "Consider it, Eli," Julia implored softly. "Please." "For Sarah. For yourself. And for me." She turned and walked towards the door, leaving the diary on his desk, a silent plea to face the past. Stepping into the blinding sunlight, she couldn't dispel the sensation that she'd sprung open a box best left sealed, releasing unseen horrors. Later, as twilight bled across the sky, painting it in shades of fire and amethyst, Julia discovered Eli seated armor on the porch swing. Transfixed by Sarah's diary, the pages catching the last rays of the day. She approached cautiously, unsure how to proceed. She settled beside him, the silence stretching tight between them. Finally, Eli spoke, his voice barely audible. "I remember Sarah used to rhapsodize about Devil's Tooth. She loved to escape out there and watch the sunset. Said it brought her closer to something divine." Julia remained quiet, allowing him to continue. "I never grasped it," he said. "I always saw it as a desolate, God-forsaken place, but she perceived something different, something beautiful." He paused, his gaze locked on the diary. "I always believed I knew her intimately, but now I question everything." "It's acceptable to doubt, Eli," Julia reassured softly. "It's acceptable to feel lost, but don't let that stop you from pursuing the truth." He looked at her, his eyes filled with a stark vulnerability she had never witnessed before. What if it's all accurate? What if she truly was embroiled in an affair? What if she truly was ensnared in something perilous? "Then we'll confront it," Julia affirmed, her voice unwavering. "Together." Eli closed the diary and surveyed the deepening shadows, the weight of his secrets finally easing. The road ahead remained shrouded, but for the first time since Julia's arrival, a spark of hope ignited in his eyes. The truth, no matter how bitter, offered more than living a gilded lie. The first sign was subtle, almost easily dismissed. Julia found a dead rabbit hanging from the porch swing one morning, its glazed eyes staring blankly. At first, she thought it a cruel prank, the work of some bored child. But the way it was positioned, deliberately centered, felt more ominous. She didn't mention it to Eli, not wanting to seem hysterical, but the image lingered, a cold knot in her stomach. Then came the whispers. She'd enter the general store, and conversations would abruptly cease, replaced by uncomfortable silences and averted gazes. Mrs. Henderson, usually so chatty, would offer only curt nods before disappearing into the back room. Even the children, who initially greeted her with curious eyes, now shied away, their mothers pulling them close. Eli seemed oblivious, preoccupied with his duties, his brow perpetually furrowed. He'd retreated again, building walls she couldn't seem to scale. Their meals were eaten in near silence, the only sound the clinking of silverware against plates. The warmth she'd briefly glimpsed had vanished, replaced by a chilling distance. One evening, as dusk painted the sky in hues of orange and purple, Julia discovered the real message. Someone had painted the word "leave" in large crimson letters across the front of the sheriff's office. The paint was still wet, dripping down the wooden planks like fresh blood. This time, she couldn't ignore it. "Eli!" she called, her voice trembling slightly. He emerged from the house, his face etched with weariness. He followed her gaze, his expression hardening, as he took in the vandalized building. "Damn it," he muttered, his jaw tight. He ran a hand through his hair, his eyes narrowed. "Caleb!" he bellowed, his voice echoing through the quiet street. Caleb Johnson, the young deputy, came running, his face flushed. "Sheriff, what is it?" "Get some water and rags," Eli ordered, his voice sharp. And then find out who did this. Ask around. Someone must have seen something. Caleb nodded eagerly, relieved to have a task. He hurried off, disappearing into the growing darkness. Eli turned to Julia, his eyes filled with a mixture of anger and concern. "Did you see anyone?" She shook her head. "No. I was inside. I didn't hear anything." He studied her face, his gaze intense. "This isn't right, Julia. This isn't how things are done here." "Then how are things done, Eli?" she challenged, her voice rising slightly. "By whispers and threats? By making a woman feel unwelcome in her own home?" He flinched, as if struck. "That's not what I want." "Then do something about it," she pleaded, her voice softening. "Help me understand. Help me." Her voice trailed off. He sighed, the sound heavy with regret. "I will. I promise. But you need to be careful, Julia. Someone doesn't want you here. Someone wants the past to stay buried." The next morning, Caleb reported back, his enthusiasm dampened. "No one saw anything, Sheriff. Everyone claims they were asleep." He shifted nervously from foot to foot. "But there's more. Old Man Withers found his barn door open, and his prize-winning rooster is gone. Martha Peterson said someone slashed her clothesline, and all her laundry was ruined." Eli listened, his face grim. "Anything else?" Caleb hesitated, his eyes darting to Julia. "There was something else. Someone left a note on Widow May Gregor's door. Just one word. Repent." Eli swore under his breath. "This is escalating. This isn't just about you, Julia. This is about the whole town." Later that day, Julia was tending the small garden she'd started behind the house, when she noticed something odd. A glint of metal flashed from the trees at the edge of the property. She paused, shielding her eyes, but saw nothing. She dismissed it as sunlight reflecting off a bird's wing, but a prickle of unease ran down her spine. As she knelt to weed the tomato plants, she felt a distinct sense of being watched. She glanced around, scanning the surrounding area. Nothing. Yet the feeling persisted, a heavy weight pressing down on her. She stood up abruptly, her heart pounding. She walked quickly back to the house, locking the door behind her. Peeking through the curtains, she saw a figure emerge from the trees. It was too far away to make out any details, but the figure stood there for a long moment, watching the house, before disappearing back into the shadows. That evening, Julia found Eli staring out the window, his face etched with worry. "I saw someone today," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "In the trees, watching the house." He turned, his eyes narrowing. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure," she said, her voice firm. "We're being watched, Eli. And they're not just watching me." He walked over to her, taking her hands in his. His touch was surprisingly gentle. "Then we'll watch them back," he said, his voice low and determined. "We'll find out who's behind this, Julia, and we'll make them stop." But Julia couldn't shake the feeling that they were already too late. The unsettling events were more than just pranks or acts of vandalism. They were a warning, a message, and the message was clear. Someone wanted her gone, and they were willing to do whatever it took to make it happen. The secrets of Dead Creek were buried deep, and someone was determined to keep them that way. Julia just hoped she could uncover the truth before it buried her too. Splintered glass framed a grim tableau as sunlight struggled to penetrate the mercantile's broken window, leaving jagged shadows to dance on the dusty floor. A bone-deep cold clung to Julia, unmoved by the weak rays. Beside her, Eli's clenched jaw telegraphed his inner turmoil, the silence between them a palpable thing. "Another warning, Julia," he finally rasped, his voice like gravel. They want you gone. Julia folded her arms, her gaze lingering on the overturned displays. Flight is no solution, Eli. It only feeds their courage. He sighed heavily, raking a frustrated hand through his already tousled hair. I should have insisted you remain on that stagecoach before this spiraled out of control. And concede? Allow them to continue poisoning this town with deceit and underhanded dealings. Julia's tone sharpened, her irritation surfacing. She caught a glimmer in his eyes, perhaps a grudging respect, perhaps mere fatalism. You're right, he conceded, his voice now softer. We need to unearth who's orchestrating this. We? Julia arched a brow, a spark of hope kindling within her. We, he affirmed, meeting her gaze directly. I can't shirk my responsibility. Sarah, she wouldn't stand for this. The name echoed in the stillness, an unspoken weight between them. Then let's begin with Sarah, Julia proposed, the words a dare to both of them. Tell me everything. Every detail you recall. Every suspicion you harbour. Spare nothing, regardless of the pain. Eli hesitated, his gaze dropping to the floorboards. It's a tangled history, rife with unpleasantries. Ugly stories don't frighten me, Eli, Julia responded, her voice unwavering. I've authored a few of my own. They sought refuge in the sheriff's office, the cramped space feeling even more confined under the weight of their task. Eli poured them both a cup of coffee, its acrid aroma cutting through the air. He settled behind his desk, the scarred surface a testament to years of service, while Julia perched on a chair's edge, her eyes fixed on him. Slowly, tentatively, he began to unravel the events that culminated in Sarah's death. He described her radiance, her indomitable spirit, her fierce devotion to Dead Creek. He spoke of the lure of the gold mine, the growing animosity, the threats that had become commonplace. He described the day of her disappearance, the desperate search, the agonizing discovery of her lifeless form at Widow's Peak's base. As he recounted the tale, Julia listened intently, assembling the pieces, searching for discrepancies, for illuminating details. She noted the hitch in his voice when he spoke of the mine, the darkening of his eyes when Widow's Peak was mentioned. Did Sarah have any adversaries? Julia inquired, cutting through the silence. Eli paused once more, a shadow of anguish crossing his face. Everyone adored Sarah. Everyone? Julia pressed gently. Or merely most? He sighed, running a hand through his hair again. There were disagreements regarding the mine's future. Some believed she was too ambitious, that she was provoking a confrontation. Specifically who? Julia prompted. Who held that view? He supplied a handful of names: prominent local businessmen, landowners, men with a considerable stake in the mine. Men who stood to lose substantial gains if Sarah's plans were realized. And you? Julia asked, her voice barely audible. Did you also think she was inviting trouble? He met her gaze, his eyes raw with emotion. I was in love with her, Julia. I desired her happiness above all else. Even if it meant jeopardizing everything. Julia believed him. She saw the torment in his eyes, the honesty in his tone, but she also discerned the guilt, the burden he carried. We need to speak with these men, Julia declared, breaking the stillness. We must ascertain what they know, what they're concealing. It won't be simple, Eli cautioned. They wield considerable influence. They won't appreciate our inquiries. Then we'll need to be persuasive, Julia countered, a resolute gleam igniting in her eyes. They dedicated the remainder of the day to plotting their investigation, mapping out their strategy, delegating responsibilities, Eli would utilize his authority as sheriff to gather intelligence, interview witnesses, and pursue clues. Julia would employ her well. She wasn't yet certain. But she knew she possessed a keen observational ability, a talent for noticing the nuances that others overlooked. As dusk began to settle, casting elongated shadows within the office, they paused, their labor temporarily suspended. The atmosphere crackled with unspoken tension, with a burgeoning awareness of each other. "Thank you, Julia," Eli murmured, his voice hushed, "for aiding me, for not abandoning me." "I'm not giving up on you, Eli," Julia responded, her gaze locking with his, "or on this town." He reached out, his hand enveloping hers on the desk. His touch was warm, rough-hewn, yet surprisingly tender. A spark ignited between them, a flicker of attraction neither could ignore. "It will be perilous," he said, his voice a low thrum. "They won't hesitate to harm you." "And not easily intimidated," Julia replied, her heart quickening its pace. He squeezed her hand, his eyes searching hers intently. "I'll safeguard you, Julia. I swear it." In that instant, Julia realized she was no longer merely a mail-order bride, an alien presence in Dead Creek. She was a partner, an advocate, a woman with a purpose. And she was falling for the sheriff, a man haunted by his past, a man who needed her as desperately as she needed him. The wind clawed at Julia's cheeks, forcing her to tug the chunky scarf tighter. Silk, a cherished memory from her Eastern life, now seemed absurdly impractical. Eli, already astride his Appaloosa, watched her, his expression a closed book. The nascent sun splashed rose and amethyst across the saw-toothed peaks, a breathtaking panorama that belied the somber purpose of their journey. "Ready? Ready?" he ground out, his words roughened by the biting air. His uniform was familiar, yet his jaw was set with a flinty resolve, a man girding himself for more than just a trail ride. Julia nodded, swinging up onto the borrowed mare. "The animal quivered beneath her, sensing her apprehension. "As ready as I'll get," she managed, her voice swallowed by the wind's keen. They started out, Dead Creek's last houses shrinking behind them. The landscape morphed rapidly. Parched flatlands gave way to a rugged, upward-sloping path. Inside Julia's coat, nestled securely, was Sarah's hand-drawn map, painstakingly copied from her journal. It marked a destination Sarah had ominously dubbed Whispering Falls, pinpointed with a foreboding X. With each upward surge, the temperature plummeted. The gale intensified, lashing Julia's hair across her vision, stinging her eyes raw. The terrain surrendered to a stark tableau of granite and stunted pines, their limbs contorted into grotesque shapes by the constant assault of the elements. Eli Assessor forged ahead, his broad back a meagre shield against the brunt of the wind. He seemed intrinsically connected to this brutal realm, while Julia felt utterly alien. "Are you certain about this, Julia?" Eli finally asked, his voice frayed by the wind's assault. "This isn't some drawing room game. This is mountain real estate. Fortunes can pivot on a dime." Julia tightened her grip on the leather reins. Sarah believed it was vital. "I have to follow through." She offered no further explanation, but her resolve rang clear. Eli offered a curt nod, his gaze pinned to the rising trail. The path dwindled, compelling them into single file. On one flank, a sheer cliff face loomed. On the other, a precipitous drop into a chasm choked with razor-edged stones. Julia swallowed hard, focusing on the mare's sure-footed stride. The wind seemed to murmur dreadful tales, accounts of those who had stumbled, their lives claimed by the mountain's merciless embrace. Abruptly, the weather cracked. A dense fog descended, shrinking the world to mere feet. The mercury plunged, and the first snowflakes began their spectral waltz. Eli reined in, his features etched with concern. "We need cover," he barked, urgency lacing his voice. This could escalate into a whiteout rapidly. He steered them off the trail, toward a jumble of boulders offering a sliver of respite from the tempest. They dismounted, their movements clumsy under the growing blanket of snow. Eli swiftly surveyed their surroundings, his eyes probing for hazards. "There's a shallow cave concealed behind those rocks," he said, indicating a murky opening barely visible through the swirling chaos. "It's Spartan, but superior to exposure." Leading the horses, they coaxed the wary animals towards the cave's maw. Inside, the cave was clammy and chill, the air redolent with the scent of damp earth and mineral. It provided paltry warmth, but at the very least, a bulwark against the element's fury. Eli secured the horses to a stout rock formation inside the cave, then turned to Julia, his expression laced with concern. "Are you holding up?" he asked, his gloved hand reaching out to brush stray hairs from her numbed face. Julia shivered violently, her teeth clattering like dice. "Just a bit chilled," she replied, striving for a confidence she didn't possess. Eli retrieved a blanket from his saddlebag and draped it over her trembling shoulders. "We need a blaze," he declared, his voice resolute. "Keep your morale up." He busied himself gathering fragments of dry wood from the meager supply close to the cave mouth. The wood was damp, resisting admission, but Eli persevered, his movements economical and well-practiced. At long last, a spark caught, birthing a fragile flame that tentatively licked upwards. He tended it carefully, nurturing it into a steady inferno. The fire cast dancing phantoms across the cavernous walls, illuminating their faces and radiating a meager heat. Julia huddled near the flickering light, her hands outstretched, greedily absorbing the warmth. Eli settled opposite her, his gaze fixed on the burgeoning fire, his thoughts inscrutable. The silence stretched between them, punctuated only by the snap and crackle of the flames and the ceaseless howl of the wind outside. Julia scrutinized Eli, studying the etched lines around his eyes, the subtle fatigue etched upon his face. She wondered at the swirling thoughts behind his stoic facade, what memories the mountains dredged up for him. "Did you and Sarah often venture up here?" she inquired softly, shattering the quiet. Eli tensed, his eyes flicking to her face and then reverting to the fire's mesmerizing dance. "Occasionally," he conceded, his tone flat. She cherished the solitude. Julia waited, sensing an unspoken narrative. After an extended silence, Eli spoke again, his voice hushed and low. She adored the panorama from Whispering Falls, he confessed, his eyes swimming with a deep sorrow. She maintained it offered a sensation of liberation. Julia reached out and gently placed her hand upon his arm. "I'm truly sorry, Eli," she offered, her voice imbued with empathy. "I can't pretend to grasp your experience." Eli met her gaze, his eyes probing hers. "You possess more resilience than you give yourself credit for, Julia Prescott," he countered, his voice gentling. "Journeying to Dead Creek, that required mettle." The storm raged with unrestrained ferocity outside, the wind wailing like a tormented spirit, but within the confines of the cave, a tenuous bond had coalesced between them. Two strangers, drawn together by circumstance, and a mutual yearning to unearth a hidden truth. As the fire sputtered and popped, Julia recognized that their mountain odyssey had barely commenced, and the elusive secrets they sought lay shrouded deep within the wilderness heart. The road ahead promised peril, but with Eli as her companion, she felt the faintest ember of hope ignite within her, a conviction that even in the darkest recesses, light could still prevail. The whiteout vanished as abruptly as it had descended, leaving an unnervingly hushed world, scrubbed clean by the snow. They pressed onward, boots grinding against the frosted ground, until, led by Sarah's enigmatic map, Julia halted. "This is it," she announced, her breath pluming in the frigid air. "It should be right here." Skepticism tightened Eli's features as he surveyed the pristine mountainside. "Nothing's here, Jules. Just rock and more snow." Julia re-examined the aged map, a gloved fingertip tracing a faded line. Sarah pinpointed it with a peculiar rock formation, said it resembled a hibernating Bruin. She pivoted, her gaze encompassing the panorama. There. She indicated a sizable, snow-dusted boulder, vaguely shaped like a slumbering bear. Eli's gaze followed, his eyes narrowed in scrutiny. Approaching the rock, Julia spied a dark blemish amidst the snow-covered terrain at its base. Dropping to her knees, she swept aside the powder, unearthing a slender aperture, partially veiled by loose scree and tenacious scrub. A mineshaft entrance, cleverly hidden in plain view. The air drifting from the opening possessed a biting chill, laced with the aroma of damp earth and something else, and the metallic tang, faintly caustic. Eli fixed his gaze upon the chasm, his expression unreadable. He reached out, touching the cold, clammy stone, a subtle tick pulsing in his jaw. "An old mine," he stated, his voice a low rumble. "I wasn't aware of one this high up." "Sarah was," Julia responded, her tone laced with anticipation. "And she believed it held some significance." Eli straightened, his eyes charting the landscape. "This is too precarious. We have no idea about the shaft's integrity. It could be compromised, filled with noxious gases, or it could hold answers," Julia interjected, meeting his intense gaze. "Answers about Sarah, about what she was investigating." Silence hung heavy between them, punctuated only by the sibilant whisper of the wind. Eli's inner conflict was palpable, a struggle between his obligation to safeguard Julia and his own consuming need to unravel the enigmas surrounding his deceased wife. Finally, a sigh escaped him, heavy with capitulation. "All right," he conceded. "But we proceed with caution. I need to test for hazardous gases first." He turned and began ransacking his pack, extracting a small handheld lantern and a coil of sturdy rope. As Eli primed the lantern, Julia drew her shawl tighter, striving to abate the chill that seemed to emanate directly from the mine's maw. A disconcerting blend of exhilaration and apprehension pulsed through her veins. This was it. They were poised to either unearth the truth or plummet into dangers unforeseen. Eli ignited the lantern, its wavering light casting erratic shadows upon the surrounding stones. He extended it towards the entrance, gauging the air for any trace of harmful vapors. "Seems clear," he announced after a moment. "Nonetheless, vigilance is paramount." He affixed one end of the rope to a durable rock projection near the aperture and handed the other end to Julia. "Stay close," he instructed. "And if anything feels amiss, we retreat immediately. Understood?" Julia nodded, her heart hammering against her ribs. She inhaled deeply and trailed Eli into the inky depths. The entrance broadened into a confining passage, the walls slick with moisture. The air hung thick with the scent of loam and decaying timber. Water trickled down the walls, echoing in the stifling silence. A lantern projected a feeble circle of luminescence, barely piercing the gloom. Eli advanced with deliberate steps, his hand hovering near the grip of his revolver. Julia shadowed him, her vision scanning the walls and vault for any evidence of structural weakness. The tunnel descended gradually, leading them further into the mountain's core. As they journeyed deeper, Julia discerned vestiges of past activity. Rusted pickaxes lay scattered in forgotten nooks, and fragments of timber supports crumbled beneath her touch. Clearly, this mine had been deserted for decades. "Do you have any idea what they extracted here?" Julia queried, her voice reverberating in the confined space. "Primarily silver." "I believe," Eli responded. "There were a few meager seams in these peaks, but they never proved lucrative enough to maintain a sizable operation. Most were left to decay years ago." They continued their descent, the tunnel winding like a subterranean labyrinth. The air grew colder, denser, weighing down on them with tangible force. Julia experienced a burgeoning sense of disquiet, as though they were under observation. Abruptly, Eli halted, raising his hand. "Wait," he murmured. "Did you hear that?" Julia strained her ears, listening intently. Initially, she perceived only the dripping of water and the cadence of her own respiration. But then, she detected it. A faint, almost inaudible scratching sound, emanating from somewhere deeper within the mine. Eli raised the lantern, casting its light further down the passage. The rays danced across the walls, revealing nothing save rock and shadow. But the scratching persisted, growing more distinct with each passing second. "What is it?" Julia whispered, her voice betraying a tremor. Eli hesitated, his eyes narrowed in contemplation. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I don't like it." He advanced a pace, his revolver drawn. Julia shadowed his movements, her heart pounding erratically. He proceeded slowly and deliberately, their senses amplified. The scraping grew louder, closer, until it seemed to originate from just around the next curve in the tunnel. Eli stopped again, inhaling deeply. He peered around the corner, his eyes widening in astonishment. Julia craned her neck to discern the source of his surprise. And then she saw it. At the tunnel's terminus, in a small recess illuminated by the lantern's flickering glow, a figure was crouched, frantically excavating the rock wall with a small, corroded shovel. The figure was emaciated and gaunt, clad in tattered rags, its visage obscured by a tangled mop of hair. The digging ceased, startled by the intrusion of light. The figure slowly raised its head, exposing a pair of wild, desperate eyes. For a moment, it stared at them in silence, its expression a composite of terror and defiance. Then, it unleashed a blood-curdling shriek and lunged towards them, shovel brandished overhead. The man, wild-eyed and skeletal, lunged again, his pickaxe whistling through the air. Eli, with a practiced ease born of years spent diffusing bar brawls and settling disputes, deflected the blow with his rifle. "Hold it right there, mister. We don't want no trouble." His voice, usually a low rumble, echoed strangely in the confined space of the mine shaft. The man ignored him, spitting a string of curses as he scrambled back to the tunnel's end, resuming his frantic digging. Julia, heart hammering against her ribs, moved closer, her senses assaulted by the damp earth, the metallic tang of iron, and the almost palpable desperation radiating from the digger. "What are you looking for?" she called out, her voice trembling slightly. He didn't answer, only grunted and dug harder, the pickaxe striking something solid with a dull thud. Eli, keeping his rifle trained on the man, cautiously approached the newly exposed section of the tunnel wall. He swore under his breath, a sound Julia had rarely heard from him. Embedded in the wall, behind a thin layer of rock, were stacks of gold bars. Their luster, dulled by dust and time, still shone with a malevolent gleam in the lantern light. The stolen gold. The reason Sarah had been down here. The realization hit Julia like a physical blow. This wasn't just about a missing woman. It was about greed, corruption, and a conspiracy that ran deep within Dead Creek. The digging man, momentarily forgotten in their discovery, finally spoke, his voice raspy and cracked. "It's mine. All mine. I found it. I deserve it." He clawed at the gold, his fingers scrabbling against the cold metal. Eli, his face grim, moved forward and pulled the man away from the gold. He was surprisingly light, his frame wasted from what looked like starvation. "Easy now. This doesn't belong to you." "It does. Sarah promised," she said. The man's voice trailed off, his eyes widening in fear as he realized what he had said. Eli stiffened, his gaze hardening. "Sarah knew about this?" The man clamped his mouth shut, shaking his head frantically. "No, I didn't say that. You didn't hear me say that." Julia stepped closer, her gaze fixed on the exposed gold. "She must have. That's why she came down here, isn't it? She found out about the stolen gold." Eli ignored her, his focus solely on the man. "Who are you? What's your name?" "Doesn't matter." The man mumbled, avoiding eye contact. "Just let me go. I won't say anything. I promise." Eli didn't release his grip. He pulled the man closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Sarah May didn't just stumble down here. Someone led her here. Someone who knew this gold was hidden." The man flinched, his eyes darting nervously towards Julia. I don't know anything about that." Julia, feeling a chill cool down her spine, knelt down and examined the area around the gold. The rock face was rough, uneven, but something felt off. She ran her fingers along a section of the wall, feeling for inconsistencies. Then she found it, a small, almost imperceptible seam. "Eli," she said, her voice tight. "Help me with this." Together, they pried at the seam, revealing another, smaller cavity hidden behind the gold. Inside, nestled amongst the rocks, was a small, leather-bound book. Julia recognized it instantly. It was Sarah's diary. With trembling hands, she opened the diary. The pages were filled with Sarah's familiar, looping handwriting. Julia scanned the entries, her breath catching in her throat. Sarah had been investigating the gold, tracing its origins back to a series of suspicious land deals and corrupt officials within Dead Creek. She had uncovered a network of lies and deceit that implicated some of the town's most respected citizens. One entry, written just days before her death, sent a jolt of fear through Julia. "I know too much. I'm being watched. I can't trust anyone." Eli, reading over her shoulder, swore again, a raw, guttural sound of pain and anger. She knew she was in danger. Julia flipped to the last entry, written in a rushed, almost frantic hand. "Meeting with at the mine midnight, bring the map." The entry ended abruptly, the last few words smudged and illegible. "She was lured here," Julia said, her voice barely a whisper. "She thought she was meeting someone she could trust." Eli closed his eyes, his face etched with grief and guilt. "And that trust cost her her life." The digging man, sensing a shift in the atmosphere, tried to make a break for it, but Eli was too quick. He grabbed the man by the arm, his grip like iron. Who was she meeting? Who killed her? The man struggled, his eyes wide with terror. "I don't know. I swear. I just overheard them talking. They said she knew too much, that she had to be stopped." "Who said that?" Eli pressed, his voice relentless. The man hesitated, his gaze darting around the mine shaft as if searching for an escape. I can't say. They'll kill me." Julia stood up, her gaze fixed on Eli. "He's telling the truth. He's terrified." She looked at Eli. "We have to get out of here. Now. This town, it's rotten to the core." Eli looked at the gaunt man, then at Julia, and finally at the gold. He sighed, a sound heavy with regret. "You're right. We can't trust anyone." He shoved the digging man towards the tunnel entrance. "Get out of here. And don't come back. If I see you again, I won't be so lenient." The man didn't need to be told twice. He scrambled out of the mine shaft, disappearing into the darkness. Eli turned to Julia, his expression grim. "We need to get this diary to safety. And then we need to figure out who Sarah was meeting that night." Julia nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. They were in deep, far deeper than she had ever imagined. Sarah's death wasn't an accident. It was a carefully orchestrated murder, a cover-up for a web of corruption that threatened to consume Dead Creek. And now, they were the only ones who knew the truth. As they prepared to leave the mine, Julia couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The darkness seemed to press in on them, filled with unseen eyes and unspoken threats. They had uncovered a secret that someone was willing to kill for, and they were now squarely in the crosshairs. Outside, the wind howled through the canyons, carrying with it the whispers of Dead Creek's dark past. Julia looked at Eli, his face illuminated by the flickering lantern light. He looked weary, but determined. "We'll get them, Julia," he said, his voice resolute. "We'll find out who did this to Sarah, and we'll make them pay." But Julia knew that finding the truth wouldn't be easy. It would mean facing powerful enemies, risking their lives, and confronting the darkness that had taken root in Dead Creek. And she couldn't shake the feeling that the closer they got to the truth, the more dangerous their journey would become. The weight of secrets, the lure of gold, and the sting of betrayal hung heavy in the air, a grim promise of what was to come. The air was heavy, saturated with the musty tang of upturned earth, and a sharper, metallic edge that Julia instantly registered as blood. In the lantern's dim circle, Eli's face was a rigid study in suppressed rage. The cadaverous man they'd surprised mid-dig looked like a trapped animal, his gaze skittering between them as his shovel scraped uselessly against the ground. From the inky depths of the mine came a booming voice. "Well now, what have we here?" A figure materialized, etched against the darkness, stealing Julia's breath. Black Bart. Older, his face a road map of deep-worn lines, but unmistakably the outlaw everyone had presumed dead. Eli's grip tightened on his revolver. "Bart, you're alive?" A dry, grating chuckle, like stones grinding together, echoed from Bart. "Alive and kicking, Sheriff. Can't say the same for some folks, though." He gestured with a dismissive flick of the wrist towards the trembling digger. Poor Jed just got a mite too curious, nosing around where he shouldn't. "What's this about?" Eli's voice was a low growl. Bart strolled closer, his eyes reflecting the lantern's glow like chips of obsidian. From the shadows behind him, other figures emerged, their features indistinct, but the gleam of steel was unmistakable. "It's about gold, Sheriff. My gold. Gold your dearly departed wife developed an unhealthy interest in." Eli's jaw hardened. "Sarah? What are you talking about?" Bart's smile stretched, a cruel and unsettling contortion. "Oh, Sarah May was a persistent one, wasn't she? Asking pointed questions, digging where she wasn't wanted, land deeds, vanished shipments she was getting close to uncovering things." Julia stepped forward, her voice trembling with indignation. "Uncovering what? Your years of pilfering this town dry?" Bart's gaze flicked to her, assessing, predatory. "And who's this, Sheriff? The latest acquisition? You do have a Pulshaw. Both spirited." He spat, a dark fleck marring the dust. "The truth is, Sarah May was about to expose my operation. Tell everyone about the gold. About certain arrangements I had with some influential parties in town. Eli's face darkened. You murdered her? Bart shrugged, a pretense of indifference. She gave me little choice. She came out here snooping for evidence. I attempted to reason with her, but she was unyielding. She threatened to alert the authorities. He paused, a ghost of regret flitting across his features. Accidents happen, Sheriff. Especially in a god-forsaken place like this. You lured her here, Julia accused, her voice vibrating with fury. You set her up. Let's just say she received an invitation, Bart corrected, his tone sharpening. And she accepted. Now, enough prattle. I'm here for my recompense. He indicated his men. Seize it. Eli drew his revolver, the click a stark declaration in the cramped space. You're not going anywhere, Bart. Don't be a fool, Eli, Bart scoffed. The odds are stacked against you. Stand aside, and perhaps I'll permit you and the pretty widow to walk away. Eli didn't respond, his unwavering gaze locked on Bart. Julia knew he wouldn't yield. Not now. Not after Sarah. Eli, please don't, Julia implored, her voice a mere breath. There are too many of them. He glanced at her, his eyes reflecting a shared agony. I can't let him get away with this, Julia. Not again. Bart's laughter boomed. Again? Still carrying that weight, Sheriff? Sarah May was merely a casualty. You actually believe those townspeople care about justice. They care about lining their pockets, and I've got plenty to ensure their silence. One of Bart's men surged forward, but Eli was swifter. He fired, the report shattering the silence. And the man dropped. The other outlaws surged forward, weapons drawn. Julia knew they were outmatched, overwhelmed, but she wouldn't cower and watch Eli be butchered. She seized the discarded shovel, its heft surprisingly bar, reassuring in her grip. Eli, heads up. She cried, swinging the shovel with savage force. It connected squarely, sending the outlaw reeling. Pandemonium erupted. Gunfire ripped through the air, thick with the bitter reek of gunpowder. Eli fought with a savage grace, his movements a blur of lethal precision. But the sheer number was overwhelming. Julia ducked behind a timber support, a bullet whizzing past her ear. She saw Eli absorb a blow to his shoulder, wincing but never faltering. Fear threatened to paralyze her, but she banished it. She couldn't afford such weakness. Bart observed the melee, his face a mask of smug amusement. This is futile, Eli. Resign yourself. Eli ignored him, squeezing off another round, felling another attacker, but his movements were growing sluggish. Julia realized escape was their only hope. Eli, we have to run, she screamed, grabbing his arm. He hesitated, his eyes fixed on Bart. I'm not leaving without putting him down. You'll die if you stay, Julia pleaded, dragging him towards a narrow passage. He searched her face, his eyes heavy with despair. Then, with a curt nod, he relented, firing a parting shot as they plunged into the darkness. Behind them, Bart's enraged roar echoed. After them. Don't let them slip away. They bolted, stumbling through the blackness, the sound of pursuit pounding in their ears. Julia had no idea where she was going, only that they had to gain distance. They had to survive. They had to expose Bart and his henchmen before they choked the life out of Dead Creek. And Julia knew, with a sickening certainty, that Sarah's demise was just the prelude. The gunshot cracked like a thunderclap in the close confines. Eli gasped, clutching at his side where a stain blossomed across his shirt, the colour of arterial wine against the faded denim. Julia's heart lurched. Black Bart, a leer of triumph twisting his features, roared commands at his gang. "Root him out! Leave no breathing soul in this hole!" Eli faltered, bracing himself against the clammy rock of the mine wall. "Get clear, Julia, now!" His voice, a rasp, betrayed the agony tearing through him. "I'm not abandoning you," Julia snapped, her tone firm despite the shiver that threatened to unravel her composure. She snatched up a nearby pickaxe, testing its heft. Unwieldy in her grasp, it was a pitiful substitute for a firearm, yet she refused to yield. Bart's men surged ahead, their eyes gleaming with predatory intent in the lantern's glow. Dust motes pirouetted in the air, catching the wavering light, lending a surreal, dreamlike quality to the grim tableau. Direct confrontation meant certain death, especially with Eli crippled. Her gaze flicked around, urgently cataloguing their predicament. The shaft was cramped, the walls shored up by stout timbers. Above, the earth groaned, a constant, low thrumming reminder of the crushing weight. A hazardous notion sparked in her mind. "Can you stand?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. He nodded, jaw tight. "Just step me away from these sidewinders." "Then listen close," Julia breathed, her thoughts coalescing. "There's a failing point in the supports. I spotted it earlier, near the South Passage. If we can reach it, I think I can bring the whole damn place down." Eli's eyes widened, comprehension dawning through the haze of pain. "You're plumb crazy. We'll be buried alive." "It's our only play," Julia countered, urging him forward. "Have faith." She supported his weight, his arms slung around her shoulders. Each step was a torment, the sounds of Bart's posse drawing nearer, echoing behind them, fueling her resolve. "Press on." "You slowpokes." Bart's voice reverberated through the shaft. "Nowhere to run, nowhere to hide." They stumbled into the South Passage, a cramped offshoot from the main tunnel. Junior indicated a nexus of compromised beams, their wood warped and riddled with cracks. "This is it. I need you to back off, as far back as you can manage." Eli slumped against the wall, fighting for breath. "What are you fixin' to do?" Julia offered no reply. She hefted the pickaxe, muscles screaming with the strain. With a guttural cry, she slammed the heavy tool into the weakened supports, again and again. The timber shrieked in protest. Splinters flew, a gritty rain falling from the ceiling. "What in the blazes?" Bart's bellow ripped through the air, followed by the scrabble of his men advancing. Julia ignored them, her attack relentless, fueled by adrenaline and desperation. The supports were on the verge of collapse. She could taste it. A premonitory tremor shuddered through the mine, the earth shuddering underfoot. Dust and pebbles pattered from the rock above. Bart's men faltered, fear etching itself onto their faces. "Now, Eli, get clear!" Julia shrieked, delivering a final, decisive blow. With a cataclysmic splintering, the weakened beams buckled. The roof caved in, tons of stone and earth cascading down in a deafening avalanche. The air choked with dust, visibility nil. Julia seized Eli's arm, dragging him deeper into the South Passage, away from the collapsing tunnel. The cave-in sent seismic ripples through the mine, the ground bucking and heaving. "You all right?" Julia rasped, her throat raw. Eli offered a feeble nod. "Just get me out of this hellhole." They groped through the Stygian gloom, the echoes of the collapse reverberating around them. Julia knew escape was paramount before the entire structure imploded. She forged ahead, relying on memory and instinct, her senses honed by the surge of adrenaline. They found a side tunnel, a forgotten passage leading to a disused exit. Julia recalled seeing it during a prior exploration, a secret route for miners, in dire straits. "This way," she urged, shoving Eli forward. The tunnel was oppressive and close, the air thick with dust and the musty tang of the earth. They crawled on all fours, their progress agonizingly slow. At last, they reached the exit, a concealed aperture masked by a tangle of undergrowth. Julia wrestled the brush aside, revealing a steep path descending the hillside. They stumbled out of the mine, momentarily blinded by the intense sunlight. Julia helped Eli to his feet, supporting him as they staggered down the trail. Behind them, the mine entrance was a scene of pandemonium, dust billowing from the decimated tunnel, the cacophony of cries and confusion reaching them. They didn't pause until they reached the outskirts of town, collapsing behind a screen of trees, lungs burning. Eli's wound bled freely, his face ashen. "We have to get you to Doc Miller," Julia said, her voice trembling. Eli shook his head weakly. "Not yet. We need to unmask Bart. Show everyone the viper he is." "That can wait," Julia insisted. "Your life is what truly matters." "Dead Creek must know," Eli croaked. "They must know the truth about Sarah, about everything." His eyes burned with feverish intensity. Julia studied him, his face gaunt with pain and resolve. Argument was futile. "All right," she acquiesced softly. "First, a safe place. Somewhere they won't expect to find us." The abandoned cabin on the fringe of town surfaced in her thoughts, a ramshackle dwelling secreted deep within the woods. It was their soul's sanctuary. "Come on," she said, hoisting Eli up. "Let's move." Hand in hand, they melted into the arboreal embrace, leaving behind the devastation of the mine, their fate uncertain. Their courage, their only shield. The ride back to Dead Creek was a blur of dust and pain for Eli. Julia kept a steady hand on the reins, her face grim but determined. Each jolt of the wagon sent a fresh wave of agony. Through Eli, but he bit back the groans, focusing on the tightening of Julia's knuckles as she navigated the rough terrain. He knew she was exhausted, scared, but she wouldn't show it. Not to him, not now. As they crested the final rise, overlooking Dead Creek, Julia reined in the horses. The town, usually a picture of desolate quiet, was bustling. People milled about in the street, their faces etched with worry, but as they spotted the approaching wagon, a collective gasp swept through the crowd. Then, a cheer erupted. "They're alive!" Someone yelled, and the crowd surged forward. Julia drove the wagon into the heart of the throng. Hands reached out, helping her down, but her eyes were fixed on Eli. Still slumped against the back of the seat, Doc Miller pushed his way through the crowd, his face a mask of professional concern. "Get him inside, quick!" He barked, and willing hands lifted Eli from the wagon, carrying him towards the doctor's office. Julia followed, her heart pounding. The faces that had once been cold and suspicious were now filled with relief and gratitude. She saw Sarah's ghost in their eyes, the unspoken accusation finally fading. Had she truly made a difference? The next few hours were a whirlwind of activity. Doc Miller worked tirelessly on Eli, while Julia answered questions from a growing crowd of townsfolk eager for news. She recounted the ambush, the mine, and Black Bart's treachery, painting a vivid picture of the struggle. With each word, the town's perception of her shifted. She was no longer an outsider, a mail-order bride shrouded in suspicion, but a woman who had risked her life for their sheriff, for their town. As dusk settled, Doc Miller emerged from his office, his face weary but relieved. "He's stable," he announced. "Lost a lot of blood, but he's strong. He'll pull through." A collective sigh of relief swept through the crowd. Julia felt her knees weaken. and she leaned against the wall for support. Later that evening, after Eli had been moved to his own bed, Julia sat beside him, watching his shallow breaths. The room was dimly lit by a single lamp, casting long shadows across his face. He looked pale and vulnerable, a stark contrast to the stoic figure she had come to know. He stirred, his eyes fluttering open. "Julia? Julia?" he rasped. "And here," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Barta," he mumbled, his brow furrowing in pain. "The Golda, it's all connected to Sarah." Julia took his hand, her grip firm. "Rest, Eli, we'll deal with that later." "No, no," he insisted, his voice gaining strength. "They need to know the truth." The following morning, Eli, propped up in bed, addressed the townspeople gathered outside his window. His voice was weak, but his words were clear and unwavering. He recounted Black Bart's scheme, the stolen gold, and the conspiracy that reached into the heart of Dead Creek's supposed pillars. He spoke of Sarah's investigation, her discovery, of the truth, and how that truth had led to her death. "Sarah didn't die in an accident," he said, his voice cracking with emotion. "She was murdered because she knew too much." A hush fell over the crowd. Gasps of disbelief mingled with murmurs of understanding. The truth, so long buried, had finally surfaced. Eli turned his port gaze to Julia. His eyes filled with gratitude. "Julia helped me see what I couldn't. She risked everything to uncover the truth, to bring justice to Sarah." The crowd turned to Julia, their faces filled with a mixture of awe and remorse. The whispers and the suspicion were gone, replaced by a newfound respect. As the crowd began to disperse, murmuring amongst themselves, Martha Bellwether approached Julia, her face etched with a deep sorrow. "Julia, child, I need to talk to you," she said, her voice trembling. Julia led her to a quiet corner of the room. "What is it, Martha?" Martha hesitated, her eyes darting around nervously. "There's something I should have told you a long time ago. Something about Sarah." Julia waited patiently, her heart pounding in her chest. "Sarah, she wasn't as perfect as everyone thought," Martha began, her voice barely a whisper. She was having an affair." Julia's breath caught in her throat. "An affair? With whom?" "With Caleb Johnson," Martha confessed, her eyes welling up with tears. "I saw them together, many times. I knew it was wrong, but I was afraid to say anything, afraid of what it would do to Eli." Julia struggled to process the information. Sarah, the virtuous wife, had been unfaithful, but what did that have to do with her death? "Sarah ended the affair when she found out about the gold," Martha continued. "She told Caleb she couldn't be with him. Not when he was involved in something so corrupt. He didn't take it well. He was furious. He threatened her." Martha paused, taking a shaky breath. I think Caleb might have been the one who killed her. Not Gart, but Caleb. To silence her." The pieces clicked into place. Sarah's affair, Caleb's anger, the stolen gold, it all formed a dark and twisted web of deceit and betrayal. Julia looked at Martha, her eyes filled with a mixture of shock and understanding. "Why didn't you tell anyone this before?" "I was afraid," Martha whispered. "Afraid of what people would think of Sarah. Of Eli. Afraid of what Caleb might do to me." Julia took Martha's hand, her grip firm. "It's all right, Martha. You did the right thing by telling me now. We'll make sure Caleb is brought to justice, with the truth about Passer." Sarah's death revealed. The cloud of suspicion that had hung over Eli finally lifted. He was no longer seen as a grieving widower, haunted by guilt, but as a victim of circumstance, a man betrayed by those he trusted. The town rallied around him, offering their support and vowing to bring the true perpetrators to justice. As the sun set over Dead Creek, casting a warm golden glow over the town, Julia stood beside Eli's bed, watching him sleep peacefully. The weight of secrets had been lifted. The truth had been revealed, and the path to redemption had begun. They had a long way to go, but for the first time since her arrival, Julia felt a sense of hope. Dead Creek might just have a chance at a new beginning. Maybe, just maybe, so would she. The dust settled over Dead Creek, the literal grime mirroring the clearing of long-held secrets. The truth, raw and unwelcome, had finally surfaced. On Martha's face, the map of years spent harbouring guilt softened as a fragile peace descended, though the weight of her confession lingered like a damp shroud. Agnes, uncharacteristically muted, regarded Julia with a newfound, circumspect interest. Even the saloon, typically a cauldron of whispers and mistrust, hummed with hushed anticipation. Eli discovered Julia on the porch of the would-be Sarah's house. The sunset bled across the horizon in vibrant streaks of coral and amethyst, a striking contrast to the pool that had gripped Dead Creek for so long. He lingered, hesitant. The words he needed caught like burrs in his throat. "Julia," he began, his voice gravelly, unused to vocalizing the emotions surging within him. I owe you everything. You unearthed the truth, you rescued this town, and you rescued me." She turned, her gaze the colour of a turbulent sea, searching his. "You owe me nothing, Eli. I simply did what felt necessary." He moved closer, his gaze locked on hers. "It's deeper than that, Julia. Much deeper. I've fallen in love with you." The declaration hung in the air, burdened by his history, his sorrow, and the fragile seedling of hope. Julia's breath caught. This she hadn't foreseen, the ache of past heartbreak. The phantom of a love lost too soon battled the budding anticipation within her. "Eli," she breathed, her voice a blend of astonishment and apprehension. I'm at a loss." He reached out, his weathered hand gently cradling her cheek. "You don't need to say anything just yet. Just know that I speak from the heart. I'm aware I'm not the easiest man to embrace. I carry scars, Julia, seen and unseen. But I vow to spend my life striving to earn your regard." She met his gaze, seeing beyond the haunted sheriff, a man possessing profound tenderness, a man forged in the crucible of suffering, a man offering his heart, imperfections and all. "Eli, Hesitation gripped her, the echoes of the past whispering doubts. "I require time. I need to contemplate." He nodded, understanding etched on his face. "I comprehend. Take all the time you require. I'm not going anywhere." The ensuing weeks unfolded as a delicate ballet of unspoken longing and tentative overtures. Eli, true to his word, exerted no pressure. He unveiled the land's beauty. The majestic mountains, the sprawling, star-strewn canvas of the night sky. He recounted Dead Creek's narratives. Not the somber chronicles of purloined gold and homicide, but tales of fortitude, of community, of inhabitants who had endured trials and emerged resilient. He aided Mrs. Peterson with her daily tasks, repaired the dilapidated fence at the old Miller farm, and even mustered a smile when young Billy Thompson attempted to arrest him for pilfering a cookie. Each small act, each quiet interlude, gradually eroded the fortress Julia had constructed around her heart. One evening, as they sat on the porch, watching fireflies flicker in the gloaming, Julia finally spoke. "Eli," she murmured, her voice barely audible, "I'm still fearful." His touch was a warm reassurance as he took her hand. "Fearful of what?" "Of experiencing pain again," she confessed, "of loving someone and losing them." He squeezed her hand gently. "I cannot guarantee you immunity from pain, Julia. Life inherently entails risks. However, I can promise my unwavering presence. I will always cherish you, and I will relentlessly fight for our love." She gazed at him, truly saw him, perhaps for the first time. The crinkles radiating from his eyes, the resolute strength in his jawline, the steadfast devotion mirrored in his gaze. She recognized a man who had confronted his demons and emerged stronger, a man offering her a second chance at joy. "Eli," she said, her voice thick with emotion. I believe I'm falling in love with you as well." A slow smile illuminated his face, transforming his features. He leaned in and kissed her, a tender, gentle kiss that whispered of promises and anticipation. "Will you do me the honor of becoming my wife, Julia?" he asked, his voice roughened with emotion. Tears welled in her eyes. "Yes, Eli. Yes, I will." The wedding was a humble affair, unfolded under the expansive heavens that have witnessed so much sorrow, now bearing witness to a rebirth. The townsfolk, even Agnes, assembled to celebrate. Martha, her face aglow, arranged wild flowers to decorate the makeshift altar. Even former members of Black Bart's gang, pardoned and seeking redemption, offered a silent benediction. Julia wore a simple azure dress, borrowed from Mrs. Peterson, her hair interwoven with wildflowers. Eli stood tall and proud, his eyes brimming with affection as he watched her approach. As they exchanged vows, their voices laced with emotion, it transcended a mere promise between two individuals. It was a pledge to the town of Dead Creek, a pledge of healing, of hope, of a future liberated from the shadows of the past. "I, Eli, take you, Julia, to be my wife," he declared, his voice resonant and clear. "To have and to hold, from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, until death parts us." "I, Julia, take you, Eli, to be my husband," she responded, her voice infused with love. "To have and to hold, from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, until death parts us." As the sun descended below the horizon, painting the sky in a vibrant, fiery panorama, Eli and Julia exchanged rings, unassuming bands of silver, symbolizing their enduring bond. Sheriff Eli Barrett kissed his bride, Julia Prescott, under the hopeful gaze of Dead Creek. The town erupted in cheers. The long night had passed. A new dawn illuminated Dead Creek, promising love, redemption, and a future more radiant than any they had dared to envision. Julia, the widow who arrived in Dead Creek under suspicion, had become its heart, its hope, its bride. And Eli, the haunted sheriff, discovered peace and love in her embrace.